Thank you all for coming, even though you're probably here every week. But a special thanks to everybody who participated in organizing, not just what I hear is just once a week, it's more a weekly thing. So I was debating on what topic to speak about when Michelle reached out to me, and I came across this topic that it's crucial. This is like the fundamentals of what Yiddishkeit represents, what Judaism represents. And I figured what better topic to do. This is sort of the foundation of what it means to be a good Jew, but not only to be a good Jew, also to be a good husband, a good son, a good parent, a good, in business, and everything encapsulates this idea. And that is the idea of being an Eved Hashem. Eved Hashem means you're being a servant of God. Now, there was once a guy who was his mother recently passed away. And he needed to daven for the Abba, and he needed to say Kaddish. So one particular night, he was very busy. He was rushing back and forth. And before he realized it, before he knew it, it was 3 a.m. He was living in Yerushalayim at the time. How was he going to find the minyan at 3 a.m.? So he went over to the most popular shtibel, the shul in Yerushalayim, and he figured over there, this is where I'm going to find the minyan. So he goes inside. And he sees there's not a soul inside. It's 3 a.m. The last Ma'ariv was 2:30. And he's like, what am I going to do? He starts thinking. He's like, he's never missed, the davening for his mother. So he decides what he's going to do. He's going to call up a cab company. He calls up a cab company, and he says, how many Jews do you have on the roster for tonight? And the guy's like, what? Like, Israel, they don't ask too many questions. He's like, how many Jews do you have that is working right now? So he looks at his roster, he says, I got 3. He says, do me a favor, send them all to this location. He says, okay, no problem. Calls up another cab company. He says, how many Jews do you have working tonight? And he says, I have 4. He says, okay, send it over to this location, all 4 of them. And he went and he called every single cab company that was in the area. And he says, how many Jews do you have working? Send them over here. Till he got 9. He's waiting outside. The first cab pulls up. And he says, "We need to go to." He says, "No, we're not going anywhere." He says, "Do me a favor. Start the meter, the moneh. The meter in Israel is called the moneh. Start the moneh over here. Start now, and then I want you to come inside." He says, "What do you mean come inside?" He says, "Just do me a favor. I'm going to pay you for your time. Just start the meter and let's go inside." So he starts the meter. Money is money. At 3 a.m. you can't be fidgety for business. And he goes inside and he sits over there one by one. He tells each car service, "Start your meter and go inside." They're all sitting over there. There's 9 guys. They're like, "What do you want from us? Like, what's good? What do you need?" He says, "I need to pray tonight. Alvit. I need to pay Ma'ariv. I need you for a minyan." And they go and they all sit together. They all pray. After they pray, he goes out. He goes to the first cab driver over there. He says, "Okay, how much is on the meter?" And the guy's like, he's like, "What's the difference does it make?" He says, "No, I need to pay you for your time." And he takes out his money and he says, "How much do I owe you?" And he's like, "Look, I've been a cab driver for 20 years. He said, no one ever has done this. I'm not taking any money from you." And he's like, "No, but you would have made money otherwise." Tried to convince him, "Please take some money." He says, "No, I'm not interested in any money." And he says, "Okay, fine, thank you very much." And he goes on his way. He goes to the next cab driver and he says, "How much do I owe you?" He says, "Oh, me? I have to pay you." He says, "I haven't prayed in who knows how long. And finally I had a chance to pray. Now I owe you." And he says, "No, I've been trying to..." One after another, not a single one wanted to accept any money from him. This was going to cost him a lot of money. It was going to cost him hundreds of shkalim in order to be able to pray this alavit. And not a single person took it. Now I want to ask you, what makes this person decide that he's going to go and he has to call? Whoever would have thought of that? Have you ever even thought about that? What happens? Probably not anybody in this room, but somebody else, right? If they would have came and they would have been 3 a.m, oh my gosh, I forgot to pray. What do? You go to the corner of your house and you pray he says, "Okay, what can you do?" So what made this guy change and say, "Oh, you know what? Now I have to go and I have to make sure that I'm going to make a minyan. I'm going to go and call everybody everywhere." So there's a fundamental difference when you look at things that you need to do. You can look at it as I do things out of the kindness of my heart. I, pray because I'm a good person. I decided that I want to pray. I, do this because I decided that I want to do this. So you're doing things because it's of the kindness of your heart. But on the other hand, you have another person in the same circumstance, same obligation, same scenario. But they don't think, okay, I'm going to pray because, it's out of the goodness of my heart, but rather I'm obligated to pray. Either I'm obligated to pray at one side of the spectrum, or you have, okay, I'll do it if I want to. It's out of the kindness of my heart. There is a fundamental difference between these two mindsets. And you have to think about which mindset you are in. You are the mindset of I'll do it when I'm able to do it. And if I'm not able to do it, my hands are tied, what have I done? And that is the difference between thinking of your obligations versus thinking of things that it's just, a bonus, whatever you do. When you think of things as your obligation, you get it done. It's not how you're going to get it done. It's when you're going to get it. It's going to get done. The question is how we're going to get there. As opposed to it's up in the air. Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, when he learned his 20 plus hours a day, he didn't look at his learning as a nice, bonus that he's going to do. Oh yeah, you can learn for 8 hours a day. You could be a big tzaddik. You could do a lot. You can do it. But he went and it's classified. His terminology that he used for his learning is something called chovos. Chovos means obligation. This is not something that I'm doing it because it's nice. I'm going to open up a sefer when I'm tired. No, because I'm obligated to do a certain amount of learning, and that's what he gets done every single day. In the secular world, when you look at the rights of a person, the secular world really focuses on rights. And you look at American law, and in fact any country, it's about my right, right? It's your obligation is to follow my right. Now, I don't have to do anything for you, but you have to make sure you don't violate my rights. In Yiddishkeit, in Judaism, it's not about my rights, it's about my obligation. It's not about what you're going to give to me, but rather what I am going to give, what I'm going to give to you. The first mitzvah that the Torah tells us after we got the Torah in Har Sinai, parashat this past week's parashat, was the mitzvah. You think about it. If you were to think about what would be the best thing to put, right? You picture this scenario. You just received the Torah. There's everything came down from heaven. It was the most miraculous event. And now after the Ten Commandments, after the first Torah, the first mitzvah the Torah speaks about is about slavery. You think that would be the first thing out of all the things? And it's not even about slavery. It's about a slave goes free after the 7th year. So what happens if a slave decides that they want to stay? They want to stay with the master. They're having a good time over there, and they want to stay. So the Torah tells us that you have to go to, the owner takes him to the doorpost, takes an owl, a matzah, and he goes and he nails his ear into the door. Not like a permanent, just makes a hole. The question is, what's that doing over here? What does that have to do after this whole big, shebang? Now this is what we put it in. So what was the whole concept of us being in Mitzrayim, us being in Egypt? What was the whole idea of us being in Egypt? When you think about it, you have someone that lives life however they want. However they decide, that's how they're going to live their life. They're going to do what they want. They wake up when they want. They go to sleep when they want. No one tells me what to do. And all of a sudden, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes and says, okay, wait a minute. There are commandments. There are things that each and every single one of us need to do. Now, how do you jump from doing nothing all of a sudden from doing so much? You need training. You need to go to college. You need to go to the university. And that's where the Jewish people went. We went to what's called slave college, slave university, slave training. We went and we studied how to be a slave. 400 years we sat there and we figured out how you're supposed to be a slave. And that's one of the main reasons why we were in Egypt, was that we should learn how to be a slave. You have to learn how to be submissive. You have to learn how to be able to be subjugated and how to be told, listen, you can't do whatever you desire. This is a big problem nowadays. When you go from a single man or a single woman all of a sudden to married life, there's a shock. It's wait a minute, now I have to, I have to deal with somebody else. I can't just think about myself. So God went and He put us in Mitzrayim, He put us in Egypt to learn how to be a slave. And that is why that we use specifically, what we use to put the ear in the earlobe is something called a matzah. This is the numerical value of that is 400. To remember that you're becoming a slave now. Who are you supposed to be a slave to? You're supposed to be a slave only to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, only to God. And now you decide you're going to be a slave to somebody else? He says, no. Now the same ear that heard on Har Sinai, there you heard over there who you have to serve and who you have to follow, and now you decide you're going to follow somebody else. Says that needs to be that you put it specifically in the ear. So when you think about it, what is the main focus? If you think about it, this is mind blowing, and we'll see how it would. If you follow this concept, it could change your life. How is it that somebody is able to go from nothing to all of a sudden full of obligations? There's preparations that needed. You want to get married, you have to prepare. You want to go into business, you have to prepare. You want to do anything in life, you have to prepare. And this was the preparation. And this, the Torah says about Moshe Rabbeinu, says if you think about Moshe Rabbeinu, right? If you think about the most significant person in response to giving us the Torah, and in response to, like, you look at the Torah at large, and who was the most popular, I don't know if popular is the right word, who was the most significant? You would say it's Moshe Rabbeinu. In fact, in English, it's called the 5 Books of Moses. It's named after him. So what would you think the terminology that the Torah sums up Moshe Rabbeinu? How did they classify Moshe Rabbeinu? What was the culmination of his life? What would you give that terminology? The Torah tells us in Devarim, chapter 34, verse 5, Vayamas Moshe died, and it says over there, Vayamas Moshe Eved Hashem. You know what the terminology is that you give somebody in the highest level? You want to know what one of the greatest praises that you could get is if you're told you're an Eved Hashem, you're a servant of God. Now, when you speak about servitude, when you speak about topics like this is not a popular topic. People are not interested, right? This is the land of the free, right? We're all about getting freedom. It's all about what everybody thinks of. It's getting out of anything. Nobody tells me what to do. In the non-Jewish world, as soon as you hit 18, you leave the house. Why? Because my mother and my father, no one's going to tell me what to do. I'm going to live my life the way that I want to live. And it's the freedom is not just for like the political or like telling what to do. We strive for every aspect of freedom, financial freedom. And you know what? Even the problem where a lot of marriages unfortunately don't survive is they feel that they're not free. I have too many obligations. And unfortunately, you hear stories where you have parents even that run away. They don't want to deal with the obligations. They're not built to whatever it was. They didn't work on themselves to be able to have that. Anywhere you go in life, you are going to you're going to have some sort of obligations. Something if you want to be successful. If you don't want to be successful, okay, fine. You sit in the corner, you have no obligations to nobody, but you're not going to achieve anything in life. But if you want to achieve something in life, you realize that there's going to be some sort of obligations that's going to tie you down. There was a very wealthy man who he was getting sick, and he had only one son. And the son was living in a very, very far away yeshiva. He was learning over there. And he was very nervous. He had a bunch of slaves. He had a bunch of servants. And if they find out that he dies, and his son is inheriting everything, what are they going to do? This one is going to take from here. This one's going to take. By the time the son comes over, even the beams of the house won't be there. So he was thinking, how am I going to make sure that I'm going to go and give my son, who I love so dearly, everything that I worked so hard in my life? So he's thinking, and then he has an idea. He calls his main servant, the main guy, and he calls him and he tells him, and he says, you've been very good to me for many, many years. You've been the best servant anybody could ask for. And he says, I want to pay you back. And the servant, he realized the servant wasn't the best. He's rubbing his ego a little bit. And he tells him, and he says, I want to give you my whole estate. Every single thing I own, I want to give you. But my son, he gets one thing. Only one thing he gets, but the catch is, he gets to decide first. And the servant is thinking about this. He's like, not a problem. He's like, of course, I'm so grateful. He's thanking him. A few days later, the man passes away. And, the servants, the whole household, although everybody was working for him, they were like, okay, the master went away. Hey, what are we going to take over here? And the main servant is like, no. There's a will and testament, and he was the guard over the entire house. Because, he didn't tell everybody, but he was getting the whole thing. He was making sure no one touches anything. And after all this, all the workers, all the servants, they left the house. He goes and he travels very far, singing along the whole way, traveling through boat, through train, through everything. And he gets to this yeshiva where this boy is learning, and he goes over to the person on the front over there, and he's asking, he says, can you direct me to this and this boy? And he directs him, and he goes and they meet him, and he says, he's trying not to smile, to say that his father just died, because right now he became multi-billionaire. He goes and he says, listen, your father unfortunately passed away, and before we do that, the boy starts crying, and he's waiting for him to compose himself, and then he finally says, listen, I have the last will and testament. The boy opens up the Old Testament and he sees, he double takes it. He says, my father is only leaving me one thing. He says, I don't understand this. And he says, my father loved me very much. Why wouldn't he give me anything? Well, only one thing? So he goes to his rabbi. And he says, Rabbi, you got to help me out here. This is the last Old Testament. Why am I going to choose one thing? I'm going to go there and find a nice expensive jewel. He says, why would a loving father do such a thing? So the rabbi reads over the letter and he starts smiling. He says, your father is a genius. He says, what do you mean he's a genius? He's look, he only gave me one thing. What type of genius gives his son only one thing? And the rabbi explained to him, he says, what's going to happen if your father says you get everything? He says, by the time you get there, there's nothing going to be left. Everyone's going to take whatever they're able to get around their hands on. So what did your father do? Your father said he gives the main servant one, he's able to take everything, but one thing he can't take. But what you're supposed to do right now is what you should take? Take the servant. Masha kanievsky, Rabbi, whatever the servant acquires, the master acquires. So the boy starts smiling. He's like, oh, that's genius. He goes over to the servant. He's like, okay, I know what I want. He says, anything you want. And he goes over to the servant and says, I want you. He's like, oh, I want you too. He's like, no, you didn't get that. He says, you are now my servant. He's like, wait, what? He's like, it can be done. Like, wait. And because of that, he was able to acquire everything. Because Moshe kana Rabbi. This is what the Ramban tells us. Ramban tells us that everything that you do, you should do for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Everything that you do, the way, realize there's laws on how you tie your shoes, and how do you get dressed, and how you eat. There's so many halachas and everything in life. Why? Because everything that you're doing, you're supposed to be doing for your master, for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that is everything that you do is going to end up getting a reward. Do you realize how amazing this is? You realize, just like to understand it, so God put you in this world. Right? And you have difficulties, you have good times, and you have the hard times. And you think, when do you get reward? When do you get rewarded for what you do? You think, okay, fine. When I come on a Motzei Shabbat, I sit and I learn a little bit, I get a little bit of reward over here, and then I learn over here, I pray over here, I get a little bit of pick it up here and there. The Torah tells us, no. It says you're able to get reward almost every single second of the day. If you go to sleep thinking that I'm going to go to sleep now, so I'll have energy to serve my master, serve God better tomorrow, that sleep is you're getting reward for. And relax, don't overdo it with the 14 hours. No, this is for God. Let me go back to the other side. No, my mother tried to wake me up. No, I'm sleeping for God now. Please wake me. Let me. Whatever it is you do, obviously according to the correct ways, you're doing it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and that means that you get reward for everything. How amazing, how unbelievable is that? This is really the difference. One of the many difference between the Arabs and the Jews. You think about it. The name of God only appears in two nations of the world, Yishmael and Yisrael. The last two letters are God's name. Why is it that the Arab, the Muslim country, they get God's name in it? So what does it mean, Yishmael? What does Yishmael mean? Yishmael, when you break it up, stands for it spells out Yishma Kel. God would listen. What's Yisrael, just to understand? Yisrael is Yashar Kel. Yashar Kel means we go straight in the path of God. But what's Yishmael? Yishmael is that God is going to listen. How does the Arab work? It's very interesting. When you look about when Avram Avinu, when he went and he had the Arab, it was really angels, but when they came to him, he says, wash your feet. Why do they wash their feet? Because they serve the ground that they go. Who serves the ground that they walk on? Because you want to know what the mentality of the Muslims, what the mentalities of the Arabs, of the Ishmaelim, is that whatever I do it for God. It's for God. But they do it they switch it around. How do they switch it around? Because it doesn't matter whether they're supposed to be doing it or they're not supposed to do it. They say, Allahu Akbar, and they do whatever it is that they want. They do the worst of the worst. It's God. God wants me to do this. After all, what do you think? I want to do this? I have to murder people, but it's for God. Baby's not a problem. It's for God. So they take everything that they do. They worship the ground that they work on because everything that they do, this is what God wants. This is what God wants. They do the most disgusting things in the world, and they think they're doing it for God. That is the flip side of where it's supposed to be. What's Yisrael? Yashar Kel, meaning that yes, we do everything for God also, but we don't do. The way it works in the Arab world, it's God's going to listen to me. Yishma Kel, God is listening to me. In the Jewish world, I listen to God. What God wants, that's what I do. What in the Arab world is what I want, that's what God's going to want, and He's going to bless me, and so on and so forth. There was the king of Prussia, King Frederick, he was one time going and he was looking at his soldiers. He had them all lined up. And he's walking up and down and looking at the soldiers in the uniform and how they're dressed and how they're standing. And he sees something very peculiar in one of the officers. He sees that this guy has a watch chain, but instead of having a watch on the other side, he has a shiny bullet. So the king was a little bit in a joyful mood. He takes out his bedazzled, most expensive watch. He got the diamonds everywhere. The second he takes it out, it's like shining from the reflection. And he looks at his watch and he goes over to the soldier. He says, "Listen, my watch says the 1:30. What time is it on your watch?" And the soldier looks down and he's like, "My dear king, this is a bullet, isn't it? It doesn't tell time." And the king starts smiling and he says, "So why do you have it on a watch on a watch ring?" And the soldier says, "My dear king," says, "for me it doesn't matter what time it is. It doesn't matter the hour, the minutes, the seconds. But there's one thing that I always know and I always follow, and this is my thought process, is that I will always take a bullet for you." So the king was so impressed with that, he took out his bejeweled watch and he gave it to the soldier. He says, "Now this is yours." He says, because that's the mentality that we need to have, that everything that we do it for HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Rabbi Shimshon Pinkus gives a mashal. So Rabbi Shimshon Pinkus gives a parable. There was a wild child, like over the, like jumping on the wall, everything that, who knows what they did. And one day this child was playing, and the ball ran into the street. He ran after this ball, and unfortunately, a car hit him, went flying. They rushed him to the hospital. It broke so many bones. Unfortunately, this kid, the arms, the legs, the ribs. And the parents are sitting there in the hospital. Now, is this a time to discipline the kid? You can say, "No, don't run into the street again." This is not. There's a time and place when you have to discipline. This is what happens during this time. During this time, the parents are showering him with gifts and get better and everything, only the positive, only amazing things. But after he gets out of the hospital, after he finishes after he gets all better, and he starts acting a little wild again, this is the time then the parents start saying, "Okay, wait. Like you've gone through this before. Maybe you don't remember." And that's when they start disciplining him. And this is where Shimshon Pinkus says, like every so often, he made a calculation, every 60 to 80 years, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God sends us a reminder, because we tend to forget. And 77 years ago, we had a reminder. It was called the Holocaust. And HaKadosh Baruch Hu reminded, and before that, there was, if you go to you don't have to go all the way back to the Spanish Inquisition, but you go to the Chemlinski massacre. There's so many he made a calculation of every 60 to 80 years, there is some sort of wake-up call to tell us, wait a minute, we're not following the right way. But what happens right after these wake-up calls? Right after these wake-up calls, God gives us, tranquility, peace. And you look after the Holocaust, there was an unbelievable amount of chesed, of kindness that God gave to the Jewish people. They were able to move to Eretz Yisrael. We were able to get a state in Eretz Yisrael. We were able to move to America. There was a lot of yeshivas. You realize what we lost in the Holocaust? We lost everything. It was a big, big wake-up call. There were 6 million Jews that died. There were the yeshivas, the infrastructure, everything just crumbled. Everybody had to pick themselves up and start again from scratch. And not just start again from scratch and like, okay, let me move to a new country. And they start off broken. They had nothing. They lost their family. They were completely broken. So what happens when you have a child sitting in a hospital and they're in the wounds? Like this Baruch Hu says, "Let me take care of you now." Says, "I send you the reminder." But then what happens is, if we tend to forget, God sends us another reminder. And recently we had a very big reminder. October 7th was a very big reminder to everyone. And this is my own thought process, that nowadays the amount of because of the transfer of information with technology and the media and the social networks, the amount of information that we receive so quick that we it affects the entire world. What hit the little country in Eretz Yisrael, a little place and a few kibbutzim, this affected the entire world. We knew instant updates, even though it was on Simchat, even though that it was on Sukkot, we were still able to somehow get some sort of information we're going through. The amount of information is unbelievable. The reminders that come is to wake us up. It's not a bonus. It's not like, "Oh, you are so good, let me throw this your way." There's obviously something that we need to do. Now the question is, how are we going to figure out what is it that we need to do? How is it we're going to find out what we need to do? The first time that Kadosh Baruch Hu gave this reminder was the first Beis HaMikdash. And what was the reason? Everybody over there, they couldn't figure out the final reason of what was the reason that God did this. Why did God destroy the Beis HaMikdash? Until Kadosh Baruch Hu came down and he says, I'll tell you why. He says, you want to know why? He says, because you didn't make the bracha before learning Torah. You didn't do B'chat Torah. What does that mean? You didn't enjoy it. You didn't do it. You know why we had to learn? Okay, fine, because I have to learn, so I'll learn. Okay, fine. But you didn't enjoy it. Do you know what the difference if you enjoy something and you don't enjoy something? The success, the amount that you're able to accomplish is so far, like you can't even, and I can tell you from like so many different examples. If you're trying to learn and you're not in the mood, you could learn and read the Gemara or the Chumash, whatever it is, 10 times. You're like, your mind is not there. If you're tired, you're not going to be able to, get it so much. If you're, whatever it is, but imagine you're like motivated, you're pumped up, you got that energy, and you're like, let's do it. You're able to like fly through information. You're going to school, you have stuff that you need to do, you're not in the mood, you can read the same page 1,000 times, you're like, I don't know. And then one day you're like, okay, I'm in it, I'm zoning in, I'm going to cram it, whatever it is, and then all of a sudden it just comes. And the same thing in business, the same thing in relationships. How many people are in relationships, they're like, I don't know what she wants from me. Well, people say that all the time, but when they're real problems, how do I know? Like, and then one time, you just like put yourself in the zone. You just like focus, and all of a sudden like worlds open up for you. And be like, oh, wait a minute. Like, how did I not see this? How did I not plug this all in? How did I not connect the dots? And that's it. Sometimes we're all over the place. We don't have it. We need that little bit of a wake-up call to be able to say, wait a minute, what are we doing over here? And if you want to know why October 7th, I cannot tell you that. Nobody can tell you that. But there's one underlying thing that if you're able to get this, it sort of answers all the questions. And that is becoming an Eved Hashem. Because that will fix all your problems. Everything that you need to do, that's going to have it fixed. That's the underlining answer. There was a person that was a Baal Tshuva, and they came from a place where, let's say, they didn't keep Shabbat, they didn't eat kosher, they did everything and anything they wanted. And then they decide that they are going to start becoming more religious, and they start keeping Shabbat. They stopped watching TV on Shabbat. They started eating kosher. They started changing their life a little bit. This particular person one day is traveling, and he gets into this location where there's no kosher food. And he's starving, there's no kosher food. And he's going up and down the supermarket trying to find something, there's nothing. And he sees a sandwich over there that's not kosher, and he goes over and he holds the sandwich and he says, God, what do you want from me? He says, all my brothers, they don't keep Shabbat, they don't eat kosher, they don't do all these things. He says, I do so many good stuff for you, right? Look at how much I changed my life. This I can't have. And he goes and he eats a sandwich. Scenario number 2. You have a working guy. Works long, hard hours. He comes after a busy day, he comes home, he waffles down something to eat, and then he runs to the Beit Midrash to learn a little bit. And he's sitting and he's learning, and after he finishes learning, he goes home and he's exhausted, he sits down, and let's just say he does things not so Jewish, when he gets home, for whatever it is. And he says, God, what do you want from me? He says, I work all day. I'm exhausted. Out of the goodness of my heart, I go to a Gemara, I listen to a Torah class. You want me now also? Come on. He says, I do so much already. You have a boy that's sitting and learning in yeshiva. And they're learning and they learn well. And then comes a summer break or any break. And he says, God, you want me to learn now also? Look at how many hours I learn every single day for you. Come on, you got to give a guy a break. And he says, you got to let me do what I want to do. And they do things that are not so, let's call it Jewish. What's the problem with this mentality? Is that they're thinking, you know what? It says, look, God, look what I'm doing for you. It says, I'm giving you all this stuff. I'm doing it for you. Are you kidding me? I don't need to do this. I could sit home. How many of my neighbors, how many of my friends, how many of my family members don't even come? And I came, but okay, fine. So now I want to do what I want to do. You're going to give me an issue with that? It says, no, let me do what I need to do. So explains Rav Shimshon Pincus. You want to know what the difference is? The difference is that they don't realize one very important aspect. You are a eved Hashem. You are God's servant. That means that you don't get to decide when I'm going to listen and when I'm not going to listen. Well, that we have the Arabs for, right? That's what they're going to do, right? The Ishmaelim, they decide that. The Jewish aspect, the Yisrael, Yashar Kel, means that we have to do everything that is what God wants. What does God want from me? The Magen of Duvna brings a mashal that there was once a very wealthy businessman. Had like 60 plus businesses, very, very successful, very, very busy. One day he gets a phone call from his from somebody. He says, "I need to meet with you." And he says, "You know how many phone calls he gets?" He says, "I can't. I'm so busy." He says, "No, I need to meet you. Monday morning. I need to meet with you." He says, "I can't. I'm so busy." And the guy is like a nudnik. Right? He keeps on going. "I need to meet with you. I need to meet with you." He says, "Fine. You know what? I'll squeeze you in. Come to me 10 a.m. in my office." He says, "Fine." He gets there 10 a.m. in the office. He comes in and he starts talking to him. And the business guy is like, "Hey, what's this for? Forget about all the pleasantries. Let's get to the brand. What's up?" And the guy says, "I owe you some money." And the wealthy guy looks into his book, and this visitor says, "I owe you $100,000." And the wealthy guy says, "Yeah, I see that. And the visitor says, "I can't pay you back." So the wealthy guy says, "You mean like now? You need an extension, like 3 months or something?" He says, "No, can't pay you back at all." He says, just like at all?" He says, "Yeah, no, I'm not going to be able to pay you back. Don't anticipate the money. It's not coming." And the wealthy guy is like shocked. He's like, "Okay, I mean, I guess it is what it is. You're not going to pay me back. What am I going to do?" And he's like, "I thank you for coming down and stopping by, but I got to continue." He's like, No, I'm not finished yet." And this visitor comes and says, "I need to borrow another 200 grand. And the guy's like, "Wait, what?" So you just came and you just told me straight out that you're not returning any of my previous money, and now you want me to give you more money, again? As it does the Maggid, what's going on in Yom Kippur? We come to God and we say we did so many things wrong. Yeah, we're like, "God, we're not paying you back," and all these things. But can I get a bonus or raise? And I need to move out. I need to buy a new car because this year, can you make it a good year? What's going on over here? Why is it the day that we come and we're asking God for forgiveness, we're saying, "Okay, God, give me a good life. Give me everything I want. Where's it? Wait a few days." The way that he says, "I can't pay you back," and he comes back a month later and be like, "Can I borrow another 200 grand? I apologize about that." That would be something more realistic that you think about it. Why is it the same time that we're going and we're asking God and we're telling God, "We're not paying you back. We messed up. We did so many wrong things. But can I get extra?" I said the Maggid because this is something very, very important. That when you ask Hashem for something, when you ask God for something, you have to know what you don't deserve it. You don't earn it. This is not because you are such a good boy and now God's going to give you X, Y, and Z. No. Everything that God gives us is a gift. It's a matnas chinam. It's a gift. And we have to realize when we ask HaKadosh Baruch Hu for something, we have to realize this is none other than a gift. God doesn't owe us anything. Everything that we get is a gift. There was once this woman that had a very hard time having children, this couple. And they were living in Sfas. And the husband was a big Talmid Chacham. He would sit and learn all day. And she was a principal of a Kira school. They did good stuff. And they were sitting in Sfas. And they were like, "You know what? So many years they didn't have any children. Let's try something else. Let's move to a different city. Mishana Malka, Mishana Mazel. You change your place, you change your luck. Let's move to Yerushalayim." So they got up and they moved to Yerushalayim. And they sat there. They went to all the specialists. They went to everything. Nothing doing. 3 years passed by, and every so often someone's going through something. Sometimes it just hits you like a house of bricks that falls on your head. And she just couldn't fall asleep. She couldn't fall asleep. All she thought about, she's childless, and it would hurt her so much. So she looks at the time. It's way past midnight. She says, "You know what?" She says, "I need to speak to somebody." She says, "Let me go to Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, the Gadol Adar in Yerushalayim." And she goes over to the cab. She tells the cab, "Goes, bring me to Shara Chesed." And the cab goes and drives her up to the house of Shlomo Zalman Auerbach. And she's looking in to see, and she sees that the light is open. She's like, "Okay, good, maybe he's still up." She goes up the step in the building. She knocks on the door, and she hears some chairs moving, and someone comes out. Someone opens the door. Who is it? None other than Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach himself. And the second that she sees them, she's so overwhelmed, she just starts bursting out into crying. And she's sitting there and she's crying and crying and crying and crying. And the gadol is sitting over there, he's just waiting for her to say, why did she come? And after all, what seems forever, she stops crying. And she says, Rabbi, can you give me a bracha? Can you do something? I don't have any kids. It's killing me. I want nothing more. The most important thing I want in my life is to have a child, to hold a child. God, can you please give me a child? And Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach looks at her and he says, I feel for your pain. It's terrible what you're going through. He says, but God doesn't owe you anything. God doesn't owe you a child. He says Hashem doesn't owe anyone anything. He doesn't owe anyone parnasa. Doesn't owe anyone family. Doesn't owe anyone anything. And she was so taken aback by this that she was not expecting this response. And she's like, okay, I guess. And she's about to turn around to leave. She thought that was the end of the thing. And then Rav Shlomo Zalman Auerbach says, but, and she's like, yes. And he's like, if you do chesed for somebody else that they don't deserve, meaning that you don't owe them anything, then measure for measure, midah keneged midah, HaKadosh Baruch Hu will give you something you deserve. So finally, some sort of light of hope that she could hold on to, she said, thank you so much. And she goes home and she starts thinking what chesed she's going to do. So she decides that she's going to go to the hospital to make people happy. That's what she's going to do. So she goes and she buys this cart and she bedazzles it and she puts all goodies inside this cart, and she goes into the hospital the next day to go and volunteer. So because her mind are always on babies, she stops by the maternity ward. It wasn't long before she realized these women don't need any extra happiness. They're doing okay, because they have their children. So she goes to the other side of the hospital. She goes to the oncology department. She goes to the hematology department, the urology department, people that are suffering, the ICU. And she goes and she starts going and trying to make people happy. 1 year goes by and she has a baby boy. Another 5 years go by and she has twin girls. When the story is written, the story is old, this baby boy was already married with a child. The girls were 17. But we see over here that HaKadosh Baruch Hu doesn't owe us anything, but we have a workaround and be able to look at, if you're able to do chesed, God works measure for measure. Not because He needs to, not because He owes you, but because it's out of the goodness of His heart. It's a manas chinam. We say, okay, listen, I don't owe this guy anything, but let me do something good to him. Now God says, okay, wait a minute, you did something good to him. Let me do something good to you as well. And this, unfortunately, is a problem where you see people that become religious for something. They become religious. Let's say, I could tell you numerous cases that people told me that, I was, because I always like to know, what made you become religious? I tried business. I tried college. I tried all these. I wasn't making money. I figured, let me try religion. Maybe that will give me some money. And he says, and it didn't happen. So what? It didn't work out. Somebody's going and can't get married. He says, let me try religion. Maybe I'll get a religious girl. Okay, let me put in this stuff and I'll put some stuff over here and I'll do the motions and I'll do the things that I need to do, and then maybe I'll get a married. Maybe I'll get a wife. And if that doesn't work, so they try the next thing, right? And the childless also, they try the next thing. So what happens? What happens if you're trying that? You do that. Not saying that it's a bad reason to do it. You should do it even for that. But what happens if, let's say, 6 months down the line, you didn't become a billionaire yet? So some people will continue. Some people will say, okay, let's go on to the next business venture. Well, God didn't work. Let me try something else. So what does that show? That shows that everything that you did from the beginning wasn't real. If you're doing something, imagine you go over to your wife, whoever's married and whoever's not married, B'ezrat Hashem, when your wife. You go over and be like, you start doing nice things. And she's like, oh, this is amazing. I found a new husband. Oh, finally, someone I dreamed of. And, or still dreaming of. And you're doing all these nice things. And then all of a sudden, you just stop it. And she's like, what happened? He says, well, I thought that, you're going to be nice to me back. You didn't do this or whatever. I'm not going to, I think I'm just going to give you nice things, unconditionally. What is unconditional love? It's only fairy tales. It doesn't work in real life. And he says, I'm not interested in, I'm not interested in that. Anybody that does that means that whatever they started off with wasn't real to begin with. Because you're doing something only on the condition that you get something back. I was speaking to an atheist and I asked him, atheist, someone who doesn't believe in God, I asked him, what are you going to do when you get up to heaven? And you're going to speak to God. What are you going to tell him? So a normal atheist answer is like, there's nothing there, they're going to be black, those type of answers. But most atheists do not answer that. Why? Because they're not atheists. Because they like to say this, but I answer. So I asked this particular atheist, what are you going to do when you go up there and you meet God? What are you going to tell God? He says, you want to know what I'll tell God? I'm like, whoa, I wasn't ready for that. He's like, I'll tell you what I'll tell God. And he says, I'll tell God, how dare you? He says all these things, all the suffering in the world, and they list all these negative things that happened 700 years ago. Doesn't even get the history right. All these things, how could there be a God who does something back? And I'm like, wait a minute, what does God owe you? Like, you deserve anything? You're nothing. You're nobody. And God doesn't deserve to or need to give you anything. You're coming with tiny. You're coming with questions on God. And how dare you? Who are you? You are nobody. You're nothing. You don't even get to ask the question. So whatever. The conversation wasn't interesting. But anyways, the idea is that you have people that they do things because, tit for tat. I'm going to do for you, you do for me. That's not the correct way. The correct way is that you are an eved Hashem. You have an obligation. When you're married, you have an obligation to be a good husband. When you're a father, you have an obligation to be a good father. When you're a child, you have an obligation to make, well, not only when you're a child, also when you're older, you have to do kibbutz avim, to be able to go and treat your parents with honor and respect that they deserve. There was a 16-year-old boy named Mordechai Kahler. The year was 2000, and he was going to volunteer in a nursing home. And his job was, he would get there in the morning, and he would round up all the men, the religious Jewish men, to go, sometimes not so religious, to go to the prayers, to go to daven, to pray. And when they were giving him the orientation, they were walking around, they say, there's one guy over here. Says, don't bother with it. The last guy that asked him, I think, got cursed out, just leave this guy alone. Don't bother this guy. So finally, he did it the first, few weeks. He left him alone, and then, one time he's like, I gotta ask, what's going on? So he didn't even ask him to go if he wanted, come pray. He goes over to the guy, and he says, I gotta ask you. He says, what do you have so against about praying that, you get so angry at, what's going on? And he was taken aback. He's like, you didn't hear the street cred or what's going on about what you coming to me with this type of request? And the guy's like, no, I'm just curious, why? So the old man goes and says, I come from a very prominent religious family in Poland. And when Hitler, when the Nazis came into my town, they killed everyone except for me and my father. I was 12 years old. And they put me and my father in a concentration camp. And we were sitting in the concentration camp, and there was one guy in the bunk that was able to take the tefillin shel rosh, right? So there's two parts of the tefillin shel and tefillin shel rosh. He was able to take one, and there were people that lined up to try to do, even though it wasn't a full mitzvah, but at least to get something every single day. And the day was getting closer to my bar mitzvah. And my father says, I don't want you just putting on one tefillin shel rosh. I want you to put on a full set. And they found out that down the barracks, a few blocks down, there was somebody that was able to smuggle in a full set. And the father said, by your bar mitzvah, I'm going to go and I'm going to get you that set so you could put on for at least one day on your bar mitzvah, you could put on a full set of tefillin. So the boy said, okay, and early that morning, the father sneaks out. This was death penalty. As soon as he gets caught, death on the spot. He sneaks out, and the boy's watching him, and he sees his father going and traveling behind the bushes, behind the barracks, going and sneaking in till he's out of sight. And the boy is waiting there anxiously. When is my father going to back? This is all that he has left in this world. His only 12-year-old boy had his whole family killed, only his father. Finally, a few minutes go by, and he sees his father sneaking, back, and he sees he has something tucked under his arm, and he's sneaking back and forth, and all of a sudden he was just a few feet away from the barracks, and the boy was ready to hug his father to welcome him back, and all of a sudden a Nazi jumps out from behind the tree, sees this Jew walking when he should not be walking, didn't even ask any questions, took out a gun and shot him in his head on the spot. The boy, this 12-year-old boy, said, I saw my father die right in front of me. The Nazi sadistically laughs and walks away. He says, as he walks away, I ran over to my father. My father was gone. He says, but one thing he had clutched in his arms was these pair of tefillin. And then he goes and he says, I want you to open the drawer. And the boy goes, this 16-year-old Mordechai Kahler goes, opens up the drawer. He sees over there, this dusty old bag of tefillin. He says, I want you to take it out. He takes it out, he brings it over to the old man. He says, you want to know why I keep these? He says, because this is what my father died for. He says, dusty old boxes and straps, this is why I didn't have a father growing up. And this is what I showed to everybody. How could I pray to a God that did this to me? And that is why I do not go to pray. And that is why I do not want to ask you to pray. The guy's like, okay, I didn't know, I'm so sorry. And he leaves him alone. A few weeks go by. One of the people in the nursing home, it was a yard side, they had to say Kaddish. And they needed a minyan. So they go over, this boy goes over, tries to find everybody. This one went to this doctor, this one was in the hospital. They couldn't find the normal minyan. So he goes and he gets 9 people. He says, the last guy, he says, you got to ask this old man, he feels bad. He says, what are you going to do? So he goes over very carefully, walks over to this room, he knocks on the door, he's like, I'm so sorry to bother you. He says, I know you really don't want to go. And he says, but we have 9 people. There's one of your residents over here, one of your neighbors over here. They need to say Kaddish for the mother. Can you please do them a favor? Just come in, just to answer, so they could say Kaddish. So this guy looks at him and he says, if I go this time, would you promise you'll never bother me again? He says, yeah, I'll never bother you. Just come this time, I'm not going to bother you again. And he says, okay. The boy gets in a wheelchair, he starts wheeling him out, and the boy, as they pass by the dresser, the boy's like, you want me to take the tefillin as well? And this old man says, if you take the tefillin, you promise you're never going to talk to me about it again? He says, never. He says, okay, bring the tefillin also. They bring the tefillin, they wheel him into the Bet Knesset, into the shul, and he says, do me a favor, put me in the back because I'm out of here as soon as I'm able to. So the boy says, fine. He says, the boy goes over to this old man and says, do you want me to help you wrap the tefillin? And he says, yeah, if you don't mind. He goes and he sticks out his arm, and he sees the numbers and everything, and he wraps this person's arm. They go and they pray. He turns around after the prayer, figured everybody left already. Everybody was gone except for one old man. This old man was sitting in the corner over there, and he was sobbing like a baby. And he rushes over. This boy rushes over. He says, everything okay? Do you want me to call a doctor? Do you want me to call a nurse? Is everything okay? And the guy shakes his head no, and he starts mumbling out of breath. He says, Tati, Tati, Father, Father, it feels so right. And he starts crying, this feels so right. And he cries and he cries and he cries. And the boy's letting him. He finishes. As soon as he finishes, he finishes wrapping, taking off the tefillin. As he brings him back to the room, this old man goes over to the boy and says, do me a favor. He says, can you come pick me up tomorrow? And the boy says, yeah, sure, not a problem. And every morning when he got into that floor, he didn't even wait. The guy wasn't by his room. He was waiting by the elevator with his tefillin ready to go. And this old man goes over to the boy and says, I've never been so connected to my father. He says, I've never been so connected in my life to my father. And day in and day out, the second the boy gets out on the floor, this guy is waiting over there in front of the elevator with a tefillin. Some time goes by, and he comes up one morning, and the old man is not there. So he goes over to the bed in his room, and he sees there's no one in the bed. So he goes over to the nurse and says, where is this and this guy? So they were like, oh, I know you guys were close. I'm so sorry to tell you this, but, yesterday he was rushed to the hospital, and he passed away early this morning. And the boy was, obviously was very shaken, very bad, and, continued what he was doing, but still this was on his mind. About a week or so later, he gets, awarded in the nursing home for all his, volunteer work. And then there's a woman that he never met before, comes up to him and she says, I want to thank you so much for what you did for me. And he says, I'm sorry, I don't know you. He says, what do you mean what I did for you? And she explains, says, my father was so-and-so, this is the guy who passed away. And he's like, oh yeah, of course. And he said, you should know that the last few months of his life, he was the happiest that he ever was. He was telling me how happy he was, how connected he was. And when he was in the hospital, when he went into the hospital, he called me frantically. He says, tomorrow morning, I need to put on tefillin. Please, can you go into the nursing home and bring me the tefillin? And he said, I went to the nursing home early in the morning. I brought the tefillin. He put it on. And unfortunately, he had a stroke and he died wearing the tefillin. And I want to thank you for all that you did. God doesn't owe us anything. We cannot have any tightness to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But when we reach out to Him, we can have the greatest connection possible. The question that is asked is then, so how do we reach that? How do we get to that level? If we know the greatest thing is being a servant of God, the greatest thing is to having that connection with HaKadosh Baruch Hu, how do we get to that? So the Chovot HaLevavot tells us that the first thing that you need to know to get this submissiveness is to have hakarat hatov, to have gratitude. To realize how much God has given you. And the more that you contemplate on how much God has given you, the more that you'll be like, wait a minute, but I owe so much. And he gives an example. And imagine somebody who doesn't have a job, and he has a large family, and he can't pay his mortgage, and he can't pay his car, he can't pay anything. And a wealthy guy goes over to him and he says, listen, I know you're struggling. I want to take care of everything. You're not going to sweat. You're not going to work a day in your life. And I'm going to write you a fat check every single week to cover all your expenses and more. How grateful is this guy going to be to this wealthy benefactor? He's going to be like, of course, I'll do anything that you want. I'm in debt to you. Certainly how great what Kiddushin Baruch Hu, God has given us everything. The fact that we woke up this morning, God gave that to you. The fact that you're able to walk, that you're able to eat, that you're able to breathe, that you're able to see, all that God gave to you. The more that we contemplate on this, the more that we can say, okay, God, I owe you so much. He says, let me do something for you. Let me do all the things that I need to do. In Parashat Vayigash, the Torah speaks about Yosef's economical plan. Now, the question is why? Why are they putting? What do we care about? What was the economical plan? The economical plan was like this: Yosef got all the food. He got it, and the Egyptians, they needed to buy. How are they going to buy the food? So they had money. They went over to him and says, "Okay, we want to buy food." They buy the money, and then they ran out of money, and there was still a famine. So they went over to Yosef. Okay, let me give you some cattle. And he took the cattle. And then they ran out of cattle, so let me give you the real estate. And eventually they ran out of everything. So what did they have to do? He said, Yosef, we need food. What we could give you? We don't have anything to give you. He said, we'll give you ourselves. We'll be your servants. We'll be your slaves. Because what happens when you can't pay someone back? You say, okay, all I could give you is myself. Let me do something for you. And this is the way that we're supposed to approach HaKadosh Baruch Hu. This is why there's an economical plan that was put in the Torah. Because they're telling you that you can't pay God back. God gives us so much. So what do? We come at Hashem. What God? What could I do? What could I do? And this is why in Shemona Esrei we say, God gives so much, does bestow so much kindness, and he acquires everything. He gets everything. Kona is like buying. He acquires everything. What does it mean that God acquires? Because of all the good that God did for us, He acquired everything. Because Kadosh Baruch Hu constantly gives and gives and gives and gives, and we have nothing to give back other than ourselves. And the question is, so how do you, let's say you can't. Let's say you're not able, okay, everything that I'm saying now is nice and dandy, but how are you supposed to get to that level? So there was a hospital that there was a certain ward that needed at least 3 doctors, very busy. One night, they were very short on staff. And they tell this doctor, this newbie doctor, he says, listen, we don't have, we're going to put you on over here, but if there's any problem, call for backup. And the doctor, he wanted to impress everybody. He just got out of medical school. He just worked so hard. He says, okay, no problem. I'll call, but I got this. And he's sitting in this ward. It's the middle of the night. And all of a sudden, one patient needs assistance, and then another patient needs assistance, and he's running back and forth, going from patient to patient. And he is he's pulled very thin. And unfortunately, he wasn't able to get to everyone, and one patient died. And there was a massive lawsuit. And he sits in front of the judge, and he says, Judge, how do you blame me? There was 3 people that needed to be, I was alone, as I did everything the best that I can. And the hospital staff, the leadership, the lawyer, he says, yeah, he's right. You cannot do that word unless there's 3 people. But we told you, call us if you can't handle it. You're getting in trouble now because why didn't you call? And HaKadosh Baruch Hu is going to tell us the same thing. We come up after 120 and be like, God, what do you want from me? He says, I did everything that I could. I couldn't accomplish so much. And God says, I know. I know it was too much. But why didn't you call? Why didn't you speak to me? Why didn't you ask me, Hashem, please help me? Why didn't you tell me, God, okay, I want to be an Eved Hashem, but I can't. I need your help. At least that you could have done. Why didn't you do that? There was one shmuz of Shalom Shadran had to reverse. He was a big, speaker. He had to reverse one speech. What was the speech? He gave over a speech saying that the Chofetz Chaim once got a hold of a watch, and he calculated how many words of Torah he could learn in 1 minute, and he calculated 200 words a minute. And this Rav Shadran was giving this speech to Yeshiva, and he said, imagine that. He says 200 words of Torah a minute that you could do, and what is it? Talmud Torah keneged kulam. And learning Torah is greater than all the other mitzvahs combined. So imagine you do 200 times 613, how many mitzvot you can get in just 1 minute. And it's unbelievable the number of what you can acquire when you're listening to a Torah class, when you're learning Torah, when you're thinking about Torah. That's endless. And this was the theme of his speech. A few days later, he gets a call from the Rosh Yeshiva, from the rabbi. He says, you got to come back over here. This is a disaster, what's going on? He says, what do you mean? He says, the boys have not left the Bet Midrash in days. They don't sleep, they don't eat, they just learn and learn and learn. How can we give up? So he goes back over to the school. And he says, boys, even though, yes, every minute you have to learn, but you also have to take care of yourself. Because when you sleep so that you're going to be able to learn, when you eat so you're able to be having Hashem, when you do anything that, even when you relax, you exercise, you play some ball, you're doing it so you'll be able to go and be able to serve God better. That's also a mitzvah, and that also you need to go and you need to take care of yourself. And when you think of a topic like this, this and happiness seems to almost not coincide. But the truth of the matter is that when true happiness is? When you achieve true happiness? The secular world tells, what's happiness? When you have freedom. When you have the ability to do whatever you want, that's when you have happiness. But that's not happiness. Inside every single human being, there's a dual fighting force. There's a Yetzer Hara and the Yetzer Tov. There's an evil inclination and there's a good inclination. He says there's a fighting force that's deciding of where you're going to go. And one's pulling you one way, another one's pulling you the other way. And you have this duality that's pulling inside of you. And whenever you have this conflict inside of you, you can never be at peace. You will never achieve happiness. That's why you see all these very, very successful, wealthy actors who have everything from fame to money to everything. They're still not happy. There's still that duality because they didn't straighten, they didn't align that. And how do you align that duality? How are you going to be able to go? You have the spiritual and you have the physical, and that's where the Torah comes in. It says, yes, you have the physical desires, but you're able to do it in the Torah way. You have the spiritual side, and you're able to do that in the Torah way. If you're able to align that, that's when you're going to be able to achieve true happiness. The things, if you want to look at a really happy person, you look at the tzaddikim and how they're sitting and learning. You look at Chacham Ovadia Yosef and how he was happy. And you look at Rabbi Chaim Kanievsky, look at these people and they were glowing with happiness. But they weren't sitting and relaxing at a beach. That's not what they were doing. They were the most busiest people alive. They didn't stop from the 22 hours a day. Even the president of the United States, well, this president's not a good example, but normal presidents, right? Even they work hard. This guy's always on vacation, but doesn't know where to, whatever, okay, fine. But most presidents, even they don't even work close to as hard as these Gedolim. And what you think, who would be happier? Somebody probably who has all the money, sits on his private jet and goes into all his private island. But that's not where the happiness lies. The happiness lies when you're able to align the duality inside, when you're able to have that contentment, you're able to have that peace and tranquility inside. And how do you get to that? You get to that by being an Eved Hashem. And by being an Eved Hashem, that doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy life. That means that you're going to enjoy life doubly, triply, times 1,000. You're going to enjoy the physical and you're going to enjoy the spiritual because you're aligning inside. And everything that you're doing for God. It's 1,000 times better, not only in this world way, but also in the next world because the amount of reward that you're getting. There was once this wealthy man. We'll finish off with this. There was a wealthy man who went to visit a Mekubal, a Kabbalist in Israel. And he gets into this Kabbalist and he starts, speaking to him. And he says, so, thank you for coming from out of, Chutz La'aretz. It means outside of Eretz Yisrael. Thank you for coming from I don't know where he lived in America. Let's say he lived in America. Thank you for coming from America. And this wealthy guy is taken aback. Says, how does he know that I don't live in Israel? How does he know that I came out from America? You didn't say anything. And they're talking a little bit, and then this Kabbalist tells over this businessman. He says, "Can you do me a favor?" He says, "There's a school that doesn't have a bus, and the kids can't get to school. Can you donate a school bus?" And the wealthy guy is like, "Listen, I've just met you. I don't really know. Usually, I meet a rabbi. The first time I give $180." And the Kabbalist says, okay, I understand. He says, remember when you were 7, 8 years old and you almost drowned on a beach? And the guy's like, wait, what? And he's like, yeah. And his mind is thinking, how do you remember that? He says, I remember that because it happened to me, but how do you know that? And he said, and you know what happened? He says, not really. He says, I just woke up and I was on I went, vacationing with my family and we were swimming out. And then by the time I woke up, I was on the sand and someone was, doing compressions, CPR on me. And the rabbi says, you know what was supposed to happen? He says, when you were in the ocean, you were really supposed to go. That was the end. But then a bunch of little angels came out. And he said, wait, you can't because he is the reason that we're able to learn Torah. And because of that, they decided that they're going to give you extra life. And he goes and he says, because of what you're going to do in the future, by donating a school bus so that these kids could be able to go and travel back and forth and learn Torah, that's what saved your life when you were 7 years old. He's like, Rabbi, who do I make it out to? Wrote a check on the spot. What's the difference that made him write the check now versus before? Before he's like, hey, what do I don't know you from a hole in the wall? But all of a sudden, wait a minute, I have an obligation. I'm here because of that. Your whole mindset changes. So the next time that you're opening a Gemara, the next time that you're opening up a Siddur, the next time that you're doing anything, if you stop for a second and be like, okay, wait a minute, am I doing something for God or is God doing something for me? Your whole mindset will change, and you could utilize this concept for everything. You want to be successful in life? You want to be wherever you are, you want to be successful? Stop for a second second and think about what are you about to do. If you're thinking you're doing something for yourself, you're not going to be as successful. And this is the idea between obligations and rights. If you think about your rights always, you won't be successful. But if you think about your obligations, you'll be successful. You're running a business. If you think only about what your employees can do for you, there's going to be a higher turnover rate than, whatever. I don't want to give examples of high turnover rate businesses, but it's going to be very high turnover rate. But if you go and you give the employee appreciation and you know how to go and retain the employees, you're going to be able to go and build a successful business because you're thinking about them. And it's the same thing in your relationships. When each and every single one of you get married, if you go and you think, what can my wife do for me? That's not going to be a successful marriage. You have to think, what can I do for my wife? And that's what you have to think every single day, not what I can do for myself, but what I can do for somebody else. And that is the bracha that I give each and every single one of us, that we should strive to be able to grow and reach the level of Eved Hashem, being a servant of God. And guess what? It's not the easiest, but you have one thing that you could do. You could say, at least to the Tal HaKadosh Baruch Hu, God, please, at least I'm calling on you. I can't do it. Please help me.